Hello, and welcome to Creepycore and Folklore, the show about creatures, encounters, old tales, and myths. I'm your host, Iona Wayland, a dark fantasy author, mental health professional, and overall curious person. I want to join other spooky souls and hear about these unusual stories. I'm feeling pretty great right now because it is October. I, of course, love and miss summer so much, but I'm also excited about Hallows Eve. Ooh. Of course, I'm making this episode all about Halloween and the history behind it and how it's celebrated throughout the world, as well as a little insight as to where certain customs come from, and a fun folklore story at the end surrounding a particular holiday tradition that you may or may not have participated in before. I would love to know what you're doing to celebrate if you do celebrate. And it's pretty cool to see how different people interpret this particular holiday and what traditions have stayed alive for a long, long time. Here are the different ways that it's celebrated, that Halloween is celebrated across the world. We're going to zoom in specifically to Ireland and Scotland, the Celts, of course. This holiday actually has Celtic roots and is originally called Samhain. It's a pagan holiday that's kind of focused more around harvest festivals. I know a bunch of my friends still celebrate Samhain in its like root form, but I also know of tons of people who celebrate it kind of in the contemporary version now. So Samhain is supposed to signify that there is the end of summer and that the harvest is over. And so reapers will go through, now you can start to see the reason why there's scythes and reaper type imagery around this holiday as well. But it's done on, I believe, October 31st. And more likely it's celebrated on November 1st. It's recognized as Samhain because it's showing that it's the end of the summer and the end of the reaping, and that soon winter will come. People would leave a portion of the crops out for various reasons, sometimes as like an offering to deceased relatives, sometimes as an offering to fey creatures. And anything that hasn't been reaped by that time is considered fairy blasted, like what I talked about in the Dark Horse episode. Also, people will light these giant bonfires and they wore costumes to ward off evil. And they also will dress up more as like a ghoulish type look so that they can kind of trick the devious spirits or demonic entities and show them that they're one of them, and so they shouldn't haunt them or mess with them in any way. So beforehand, it was considered Samhain. It still is. But after Christianity / Catholicism, multiple different Christian religions swept through the Celtic regions, it was then called All Hallows Eve on the 31st and All Saints Day on November 1st. People would also bring in livestock and slaughter some of them to keep the meat during the winter and to pickle a lot or preserve some of the reapings, as well as add salt and dry out a lot of the meat that they had harvested. And the reason they did this on this particular day was because it was said that the veil between our world and the Fey realm were at their thinnest. It was also believed, kind of how I mentioned earlier, that the boundary between the living and the dead was also at its thinnest. So that's why also on top of like the ghouls and ghosts and things like that, some people would dress themselves up as like fairy type creatures. They would go from house to house and recite poetry in exchange for food. Of course, there are these big feasts and bonfires. And another reason why they lit bonfires was to keep darkness away. And also in the Celtic regions, they would light jack-o'-lanterns as another way of having like candlelight, like a flame type light, keeping the darkness away. In Japan, there's actually something called the Kawasaki Halloween Parade. This is more geared toward adults, not saying that it isn't allowed to be celebrated by children, but it's more of an adult holiday. There's lots of cosplaying and parties and competitions. You can actually be one of the costumed people presented in the Kawasaki parade. There are other parades too, but this one is reportedly the largest one for this particular holiday. You have to apply 2 months in advance to wear your costume and be approved to participate in that parade. And there are upwards of 4,000 participants by the time the parade is held. In Italy, there's Ognissanti, and All Saints' Day is the English direct translation of it. It's celebrated on November 1st through 2nd, but a lot of people celebrate it a day or two in advance. This sounds really, really beautiful to me. I think this is like a beautiful way to celebrate. People will decorate cemeteries with fall chrysanthemums, and even some people will leave some gifts for their children, and on the tags and such, it'll say like, oh, from great aunt so-and-so, a late relative, kind of almost like Christmas, like it's kind of like the spirit of the person is the one who gave you that present. And so I think it's really cool that like some people will leave gifts for their kids on behalf of those late relatives. Then of course, the beautiful, the incredible, the amazing Dia de los Muertos in Mexico. Oh my God, gorgeous. I would love, it is like on bucket list level, love to go to visit Mexico for Dia de los Muertos. It's, as many of you know, it means the Day of the Dead. It's gorgeous, huge holiday. It's what I found fascinating from the research I did. I didn't know this. It's actually a combination of traditional indigenous practices mixed with European traditions. It's unfortunate why there are European traditions at all in Mexico, but that's a whole other rant that I should go on in a different episode. About indigenous folklore and how it's different depending on tribes and regions and things. It's very, very cool. But unfortunately, there was the European colonization of Latin America, South America, and Central America. You know, the fun part of history. But together, the traditional indigenous with the European traditions combined creates this gorgeous holiday of Dia de los Muertos, and it's believed that the dead relatives return to visit the living. There's lots of celebrations and memories of their life by having pictures of those late relatives. There are altars created, or some will make altars specifically like on the grave sites. Beautiful flowers everywhere, especially marigolds. Gorgeous, gorgeous. The streets are filled with celebration, parades, treats. They're given, they have the pictures of their loved ones with offerings or ofrendas given to them. It also, a lot of people will picnic near the graves. There's special like bread and treats and chocolates, and it's just so beautiful, the celebration of it. And a lot of times they'll bring that person's favorite thing that they loved while they were living. And it's said that they eat and celebrate in these different sites or around these different altars with candles, because the candles are meant to light the way to the altar that they created for them, and it also helps them cross back over when the veil is starting to thicken. Of course, I think many people have seen the candy skulls. There's skull imagery of skulls and skeletons. I know I've talked before about how I had such a fear of skeletons before, but I do find them fascinating and beautiful. And of course, technically everybody has a skeleton in their body. So I just think it's just so beautiful. Like, what a beautiful way to honor life. Obviously, I'm biased, clearly. Now it's off to Guatemala, where there is an ancient Mayan custom that dates back 3,000 years. It's called Barriletes Gigantes, and it means Giant Kites Festival. How cool is this? Okay, so what they do is they take this giant, brightly colored kite. They create it from materials that are authentic to them or organic for them, and they fly these kites in the cemetery. And I just think, like, what a visual, what an absolute vision to see. It's just like so beautiful. I think that's, like, again, such a lovely way to remember those who have passed. It's so beautiful, and I have never heard of that one before. The other ones I had heard about or participated in, or wish to participate in, but the Barriletes Gigantes is definitely something that, like, that giant kite festival I did not know existed, and that's really, really cool. Now let's look at some traditions that are still celebrated in the US today, and maybe a bit about where they come from. So the first one I'm going to cover is the very dreaded candy corn. Oh my God. I hate candy corn. It belongs in the friggin' trash. Everyone else in my family friggin' loves it. It's awful. It's so gross to me, but there are lots of people who like it. Something I didn't know about it was that it's actually from the Wonderle or Wonderle candy company in Philadelphia, PA, or Pennsylvania, for those who aren't US folks. If anyone has ever seen it, it looks like a piece of corn. Like, the top is like that yellow corn piece, and it kind of looks as if you've pulled it out by the root. It's like 3 colors, usually considered tricolored. It's disgusting. It tastes gross. I don't even know how to describe the taste, and I mean that in a very bad way. But also, there were like these times where the candy company, like, wanted it to try and look or taste a different way. It's and so they'll make candy corn that tastes like root beer, or, like, I think at one point they were making it that it's so, like, since it's around, to make it last longer than just like October festivities in November. There's a holiday. I'll call it a holiday. There's a lot of layers to this one. It's called Thanksgiving. On the surface, it is a lovely holiday. When you look at the history of it, it's very scary and sad. However, there is a lot of focus on gratefulness that I think everyone should focus on, is like gratefulness and comfort with things that you have in your life, and just like being thankful in general. And there's like a feast type celebration surrounding that. The taste for this particular November holiday is more related to like savory notes, like turkey and mashed potatoes and things like that. And I believe at one point they actually made, this is so gross, I actually made the candy corn taste like that, like mashed potatoes and gravy. Why would you do such a thing? The texture is also so wrong. I don't know if this is like my neurodivergence popping up again in this for this particular scenario, but good grief, it's like the texture so it's like eating a slightly melty piece of plastic to me, gross. So I'll stop flipping out about that. The next tradition that happens is getting candy treats. So originally for like trick or treating, and I'll get more into that later, but originally the like treats that you were given was originally like coins, fruit, like dried fruit, nuts, and little toys. But in the 1950s, stores started to make individually wrapped candies. And so that actually caused people to be able to hand those out individually. And that caused the candy craze that's still mostly focused on to this day. So the imagery of bats, decorating with bats, I think maybe everyone at this point, and if you haven't, it's very cute. There's this little girl with lots of bat decorations behind her, and she's like, it's freaking bats. I love Halloween. It's so cute.
Look it. It's freaking bats. I love Halloween.
I love Halloween. Very adorable. And it's neat because that imagery of bats actually comes from those massive bonfires that was supposed to light the way for those who have deceased to visit briefly, and to make sure that the darkness stays at bay. Because of those large bonfires, there were bugs that were drawn to the light, kind of like that saying, like a moth to a flame, like they're drawn to that light. And so bats are nocturnal nighttime hunters, and they would swoop around and swarm around the bugs that are close to the bonfire. So it's not unusual to see bats around. I think now, ever since I've seen that like little video of the little girl being like, look, it's freaking bats. I've always called them freaking bats, and I can tell you that there are a shit ton of freaking bats around my household, and the whole time I've grown up, there's always been a bat that lives in the attic. It's not as weird as it sounds. And then, or bat boxes that we put out where it's kind of like birdhouses, and it's supposed to kind of like encourage the bats to nest and procreate and live healthily. And they are an endangered species. I'm not sure how many of them are endangered or if all bats are endangered, but I know North American bats are, lots of them are endangered. There's lots of negative stereotyping around them, such as like they carry rabies and such like that, even though I don't believe that's the case. And I think they're so cute. They look like little mice with their little flappy flap wings. They do flap very intensely, and when they use echolocation to hunt, they actually aren't that term blind as a bat. I don't think they're visually impaired. It's just more that they hunt a different kind of way that is at nighttime, so it's not reliant on the eyes, but they're not actually blind. So I thought that was interesting too. But they dive and swoop, and they flap very heavily. And so I think that those kinds of jerky movements can kind of cause people to feel on edge, especially if they're like kind of against flapping, like if they get freaked out by flapping. And then also it's nighttime, so everything kind of seems to have like an ominous vibe around nighttime for whatever reason. I think at some point I should do like a bat episode. That'd be fun. Another one that was pretty cool that I didn't know about was candy apples. So candy apples are apples that are dipped in like a syrup, or whether it's a fruit syrup or a chocolate syrup that kind of hardens as a harder shell. Apparently this was originally like done because fruit is preserved in like a syrupy or sweetened type substance. And if you think about, the harvest day or Samhain, where you would reap the harvest and then preserve those fruits that you got, if you did get any fruits that year, then that's a really cool way to think about where it got its origins. But apparently in Newark, New Jersey, William W. Kolb accidentally made it in 1908. Apparently he was trying to experiment with some cinnamon candy specifically for like the wintertime holidays, and he, to test out like the viscosity of it, or that's me guessing, of like if it was syrupy enough, if it was the right consistency, he dipped apples on sticks into it. And then it looked, quote, good enough to eat, end quote. And so he started selling them, and then it sold by storm. Like, it ended up being a very commonplace treat during October and November. More imagery that still happens are having candles and bonfires. And, of course, there were those huge bonfires. You gotta love a good fall bonfire. Man, it is such a vibe. And then having those candles. Also, if you think about scary movies, there's lots of like candlelight looking visuals. Also, like flashlights, I wonder, is like a modern day candle in a way. It's said to keep the darkness at bay, and then also help souls visit. I feel like there's ghost hunter type ways to use candles and flashlights, but I don't know a lot about ghost hunting. I'm too much of a scaredy cat to do that. So if anyone has any ideas as to how if that's like a thing, or if I'm just making that up because that happens sometimes, then definitely tell me, because I think that's fascinating. There's also known to be lots of pranks. They're not really sure where the whole pranking thing started, other than it being like maybe a carryover from May Day, or I think May Day is Beltane, I thought. And just in my mind, that's like 5 months difference. That's almost a half of a year. There's no way that would carry over from Beltane, unless it's from that kind of like the veil is thin kind of thing going on, and you just prank during those times. I don't know. But I don't remember Beltane having a lot to do with pranks. I thought, Beltane had a lot of the fire imagery again. But anyway, so not really sure, but there is something called Devil's Night. And this is not one particular night, but it's like the several nights leading up to Halloween where people would get kind of rowdy. And I think it's just like thinking about mischief. Like, I think that it's just natural that people might want to do some mischievous things leading up to Halloween. Bobbing for apples is an interesting one. I have done this one before, but admittedly only like a couple times. And each time I did it was at a different person's birthday party that they were having as a celebration for their October birthday. So I thought it was interesting that that's where it overlapped. But this came from a Roman festival honoring Pomona, which is the goddess of agriculture and abundance. It's an old courting ritual where young folks would bob for apples at the same time, and based off of like how well they caught the apple, how quickly, if it fell out of their mouth or not, like all of these different things kind of was supposed to predict the future of their relationship. And I think that's so fun. This one is very interesting to me. I love looking at color and the different kind of ways color can be representative of different things. Of course, there's that black and orange color scheme, and this is said to come from black symbolizing the death of summer, and orange is symbolizing the autumn harvest season. I went over this a bit in my Curiosity Cat episode, where cats are kind of seen, specifically black cats is seen related to luck in some way, whether it's bad luck or good luck. But cats are kind of like a symbol of the devil, unfortunately. I don't know where. Well, if you want to know more about why they're considered a symbol of the devil and why they're considered like a witch's familiar, they're like usually seen that way, you can listen to that episode where I go more in depth about it. But I think that having cats be symbolically related to luck or an omen of some sort is why there's kind of more of an emphasis on a cat, or specifically a black cat, during Halloween. So now we come to the tried and true trick-or-treating. There are 3 theories where this comes from. One is related to the Celtic celebration of Samhain, where people would leave part of their harvest that they reaped for the spirits and fairies. And then they would dress up as unearthly beings to accept the food. It was kind of like, I'll dress up like this thing so I don't get, terrorized on this particular night. But I also want to be able to go door to door and pick up some of the reapings, which I think is a fun way to get food. There's a specific Scottish version within the Celtic Samhain of something called guising, or quote souling, end quote. This happened during the Middle Ages. Children and poor adults would go around and collect food and money in exchange for them praying and devoting some of their prayers for All Souls Day to whatever deceased person or particular thing that they need prayers for. The third possibility or layer to trick-or-treating is something called bell snickling. This is a German-American Christmas tradition where kids dress up and get candy if their neighbors can't guess who they are. And I thought that was really cool. I'd never heard of bell snickling before, and if anyone has participated in that, I'd love to hear about it. Of course, the act of putting on costumes is to try and trick evil spirits by disguising yourself as one of them. And, when you think about costumes now, it's kind of like, well, there are many different vibes that different costumes can have. Maybe they can be cutesy, maybe they can be creepy, they can be funny, they can be kind of suggestive. There are all sorts of fun ways to dress up. But I was just thinking about the vintage Halloween costumes, and they are no joke. They are very upsetting to look at. They look like any old image of those back in the day of kids dressing up in certain ways for Halloween. Looks like a freaking cursed image. It's awful. And finally, the last celebratory way that many Americans and people around the world, I'm sure, celebrate Halloween is by carving a jack-o'-lantern. I personally never liked carving jack-o'-lanterns. The texture of the inside of the pumpkin is very upsetting for me to touch. I used to have to use those spaghetti type spoons to scrape out the insides. I always liked coming up with how to cut the face, or if there was an image I wanted to glow through when I added the fake candle on the inside. I think that's fun. And I like the smell and taste of pumpkin, but I can't touch the guts. That is not for me. But the jack-o'-lantern actually comes from the story of Stingy Jack, and I'm going to read a telling of it. It's by Les Hewitt. It's their iteration from an article that I'll have listed in the show notes. So it reads, "This is just one version of an old tale about a foul drunkard of a blacksmith known as Stingy Jack. Jack was a two-faced, deceitful schemer who thrived on manipulating people. His selfish spirit possessed not a shred of humanity or kindness for anyone, and the homeless beggars only repulsed him. Word of his vile reputation reached Satan and took more than a passing interest in this evil man, so he put plans in motion to meet him. One evening in the dark hills of rural Ireland, one of Satan's devils posed as a dead man waiting for Stingy Jack to run into him. When Jack came across the body, a deranged face with wide eyes and an evil grin stared back at him. Stingy Jack instantly realized that his time was up and that the devil had come to collect his soul. He begged for a final request, which the demon granted. Jack told him that he wanted just one more drink before he had to depart the world, and he took the devil to the nearest tavern. One drink turned into another, and then another. Before too long, their consumption of alcohol exceeded the demand, and there was nothing left for the pair to drink. When it was time for them to settle up, Jack didn't have any money. He casually turned to his new drinking buddy and suggested that, since he was a devil with magical powers, he could simply transform himself into a piece of silver to pay the tab. The devil obliged, but instead of paying, Jack rammed the coin into his pocket. Aware that Stingy Jack had double-crossed him, the devil fought to get out. However, a crucifix in the pocket trapped him in. Jack made a deal with the devil. If he would leave Jack alone for a decade, he would release him from the coin, and the deal was made. Once this amnesty was reached, the devil found Jack once more, ready to take him to hell. This time, however, Jack asked for an apple from a nearby tree to quell his hunger on the long journey. While the devil selected an apple, Jack carved 4 crucifixes on the bark of the tree, trapping the evil being within its branches. On the condition that Jack will not go to hell, Jack once again offered the demon his freedom. Once again, there was little choice but to submit to the man's wishes. Stingy Jack continued the rest of his life safe in the knowledge that he outsmarted the devil, not once, but twice. Many years of alcoholism finally took their toll. It seemed that Stingy Jack could outsmart the devil, but he could not outsmart death when he found himself standing in front of the pearly gates. St. Peter turned him away. Heaven, as many people know, would not welcome a lying, deceitful drunk. Undiscouraged, Jack headed towards hell, where his nemesis was biding his time to get revenge. Satan also refused him entry, citing the agreement they made when Jack was very much alive. Although neither heaven nor hell allowed Jack entry, Satan did grant one last wish. Jack asked for an ember from the fiery depths to give him a little light while he wandered the world in darkness. Satan picked one small red-hot coal and gave it to Jack. To carry his burning ember, Jack found a turnip and hollowed it out, turning it into a makeshift lantern. Ever since then, Jack's ghost could be seen wandering aimlessly around the Irish countryside. Whenever locals saw mysterious lights, they would say, "That's just Jack o' the Lantern." Later, the term became synonymous with the name for Stingy Jack's wandering spirit, Jack-o'-lantern. With evil Jack damned to wander the world until Judgment Day, the Gaelic Irish community did not want his spirit visiting their homes. So they took precautions on October 31st, the day of the Celtic festival of Samhain. On this day, the spirits of the netherworld could pass through to the world of the living. Ghosts were attracted to the living, so each home carved a menacing face into turnips and rutabagas and prominently displayed them on their doorstep with a burning ember or candle, just like Jack's lantern. This would keep away the spirits, including Jack, they hoped. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, the Irish migrated to America and brought along their beliefs, holidays, and traditions. They quickly realized that there was a type of gourd indigenous to America that was bigger and better for carving jack-o'-lanterns. Of course, this was the pumpkin. And on the same day as Samhain, October 31st, 145 million Americans will have bought and carved a homemade jack-o'-lantern and place on their doorsteps. I thought that was so fun and interesting. I am very curious to know, do you have any traditions that you would like to add? Maybe they're specific to your family, and it's just like an inside joke, or maybe it's related to your culture. Anything that I talked about, were you surprised by? And I'm curious to know, what are you going to participate in? This is my baby's first Halloween, and ever since I read more about Stingy Jack, it makes me maybe want her to go as the traditional jack-o'-lantern baby's first Halloween, but I'm not sure yet. I think she'd look cute no matter what she's dressed as. But that was really fun to dive into those traditions. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful October as they gear up for the change in season. And I will talk to you more next week. Thanks to all you spooky souls out there for listening to Creepycore and Folklore. Follow on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok if you're looking for more uncanny content. If you have your own tales to tell, you can email creepycoreandfolklore@gmail.com. If you liked this, please leave a review wherever you get your podcasts, or tell a friend who might enjoy these stories to spread the word. If you're interested in dark fantasy, check out my Hollowverse series. Ashes is available now in paperback and ebook on Amazon and audiobook on Audible, and the sequel is underway. I'm Iona Wayland, and I'll see you next time.